Have you ever stopped to think about how we know anything about people who lived thousands and thousands of years ago? I mean, they didn't exactly leave behind social media profiles or video diaries. So how on earth do we reconstruct their world? Well, today we're going to put on our detective hats and find out. This is the central puzzle, right? It feels almost impossible. But historians and archaeologists are like master detectives. They follow these tiny, faint clues, the faintest echoes from the past, to piece together a surprisingly clear picture of what life was like. So when it comes down to it, we really have two main trails to follow. The first is what people said, the stories, the poems, the hymns that somehow survived all this time. The second is what they left behind, the silent, physical evidence buried right under our feet. Let's start with their words. Okay, first up is the spoken clue. We're about to crack open one of the oldest books known to humanity, and you'll be amazed at what it can tell us.
Our star witness is the Rig Veda. Now, this isn't a history book in the way we think of one. It's a huge collection of over 1,000 beautiful, really complex hymns, or suktas, that were all composed in praise of different gods and goddesses.
And get this, the oldest parts of the Rig Veda were being composed around 3,500 years ago. That is just staggering. It's like a voice speaking directly to us from the deep past, way before many of the other ancient civilizations we usually learn about. But here's what's really wild. For centuries, the Rig Veda wasn't even written down. Nope. Instead, priests taught students to memorize every single syllable perfectly. It was like this living, breathing library of sound, passed from one generation to the next long before anyone ever put it on paper. That's the real question, isn't it? If it's just a bunch of prayers, how can we use it to figure out what daily life was like? Well, historians have learned to read between the lines, looking at the specific language and the metaphors people used. For example, take a look at this. It's part of a dialogue between a wise man, a sage named Vishwamitra, and two rivers, the Bees and the Sutlej. He's asking them to let his people cross, but listen closely to the words he chooses to praise them.
See? He doesn't just say the rivers are fast. He compares them to swift horses and shining cows that lick their calves. He says they move like chariots. This one little prayer tells us so much. It shows that horses, cattle, and chariots were absolutely central to this society. They were the symbols of wealth, speed, and power.
Okay, so that's what the words tell us. Now, let's switch gears and listen to the silent clues, the stories that were left behind in stone. Across huge parts of ancient India, starting about 3,000 years ago, people started building these incredible structures called megaliths. The word literally just means big stones. And they're these silent stone sentinels, often arranged in circles, marking the final resting place of the dead. And just think about the work involved here. You had to find the right stones, dig these huge pits, and then somehow transport and position these massive boulders. This wasn't a small task. It would have taken the whole community. You just don't go to all that trouble unless these burials were incredibly important events. So we have to ask, what can a simple hole in the ground really tell us? Well, a grave is so much more than that. It's like a little time capsule. And what people were buried with can reveal a ton about their life, their status, and what their society valued. At a site called Brahmagiri, archaeologists hit the jackpot. They found one skeleton, buried with just a few clay pots. Pretty simple. But nearby, another person was buried with 33 gold beads, copper bangles, stone beads, the whole shebang. That stark difference tells the story of a society that was not equal. It had leaders and followers, rich and poor. And then there's this amazing find at a site called Inamgan. A man was buried inside a massive, four-legged clay jar right in the courtyard of the biggest house, at the very center of the whole settlement. You know, that kind of special treatment is a pretty powerful clue that this guy was somebody important, maybe even the chief. So we've got our spoken clues from the Rig Veda, and we've got our silent clues from the megaliths. Now for the exciting part. What happens when we put them all together? The Rig Veda actually gives us names for different groups in society. You had priests called Brahmins, you had leaders called Rajas. But, and this is key, these weren't kings with big palaces and tax collectors. They were leaders chosen for being brave warriors. The community as a whole was the Jana, or Vish, and then there were their opponents, the Dasas, people who spoke different languages and were often captured in wars. And look at how this all lines up in time.
That settlement at Enumgaon, with the chief's burial, existed right around the same time the Rig Veda was being composed, and the practice of building those fancy megalith burials started just a few centuries later. We're literally watching these social structures develop.
When you weave these different threads of evidence together, a really complex, fascinating world starts to come into focus. And, this whole process kind of makes you think about our own time, too. So, ultimately, this is what it boils down to. The hymns give us a window into what people believed and valued, and the burials give us the hard, physical proof of how their society was structured. Together, they paint this vivid picture of a world with warrior chiefs, incredibly precious cattle, and the very clear beginnings of social divides. And that just leaves us with one final, kind of mind-bending thought. Thousands of years from now, when archaeologists start digging up our world, what will they find? What will our version of books and burials, our digital footprints, and our sprawling concrete cities tell them about what we valued, who held the power, and how we really lived?